Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast from OmegaMetroid.com. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined by Dakota Lasky. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Today is as we were recording, the first day of spring. So I went for a nice walk today, and it's at least here the weather's starting to get nice already. We didn't really even have like a true winter, which is kind of a bummer, but I'm looking forward to the nice weather. I'm already taking my allergy medicine, getting ready in preparation. I'm doing all right, man. How you doing?
Not too bad. What I was saying like last week, like I had a case in the Mondays. I feel like I got kind of the same thing going on this week, but like once again, it's like doing this podcast is like injecting the cure into my veins. So like I'm
True.
fired up to be here and talking about Metroid again with you guys, and also joined by Daniel Hoctor, aka A Fallen Apple, aka the creator of a Zelda Dungeon featured image. Thank you for that.
Hey, thanks.
Wow, what a title.
I'm doing good, man. Right? I'm like
How are you doing?
Daenerys over at Game of Thrones. My title just gets like, bigger and bigger every time.
And that's not the only title
good.
that we should call you, by the way, as we were talking about before the show started. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that or not, but...
Hey, all right. I mean, come on. I clearly was like, so Friday night, I was high on life, legit. I was even in our Discord because, like, look, I love all you guys. This is like a good community. By the way, if you're not on the Discord, it's a really good community. But anyways, Friday night, like, my now fiance proposed to me.
Woo!
He popped the question, and we are officially engaged. And yeah, it was a heck of a night. So yeah. But I'm doing good, clearly, and I'm pumped. I'm pumped to talk about Metroid, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can't wait to get into our episode, and big congrats to you. It's awesome. So yeah, we are here today to talk about Metroid II, and we're going to talk about Metroid II Return of Samus, and do a retrospective, a deep dive into the game. We're going to talk about its impact. We're going to talk about its legacy. We're going to talk about a lot of the various features of the game. And, I talked about this a little bit on over on Patreon, but we haven't really covered this game in great detail throughout our run on the podcast. So with it being now available on Nintendo Switch Online, I thought that it was now a good kind of opportunity to talk a little bit about this game that really kind of gets under respected, or it doesn't get like the level of appreciation that it deserves. And I guess maybe we can just start with that. With like, I think that it would have been, I respect this game because it would have been really easy for this game to come out and just be kind of like Nestroid on the Game Boy. But instead, they went like a completely different direction. They made like an incredibly solid, unique experience that really kind of brought to life everything that the Game Boy could do. And like they didn't phone it in, which I feel like I really appreciate about this game. And I don't know that this game gets the respect that it deserves from the Metroid community, with considering like how much that this game really brought to the franchise. So I'm excited to talk about Metroid 2 today, and I guess that we should start off by talking about our first like experiences playing the game. And my first experience was, you know me. I was like, and by the way, before I even start talking about anything, this game was actually, or not this game, right now, if you are a member of any country that belongs to Europe, you can get a Metroid 2 poster available on the My Nintendo store. So that's pretty sweet. And by the way, you can also get like those awesome like Link's Awakening posters, the Mario Golden Coins posters. They look so cool. Like it's some of the best. It's some of the best box art in the series. Maybe not like the absolute best, but like that pose of Samus looks so awesome and spectacular. But like I figured that maybe we could start off just kind of talk about our like first playthroughs from Metroid 2, and to kind of go back to my story. You guys know that I was like kind of a big like Metroid. Like I got into Metroid after Smash. And I played Super Metroid, and then I played Nestroid, and so, like, really, that's all there was at the time. So I was kind of like, okay, well, like, now I have to go and play the original Metroid, or Metroid 2. So I went to Calgary Comic-Con in, like, 2001 or something like that, and I found myself a cartridge of this game, played it, and I remember at the time, I really enjoyed it, actually. Like, a lot of the things that I found very frustrating or even nigh unplayable about Nestroid were like definitely a lot easier to digest in this game. And I remember I really liked playing it. I really enjoyed my time with it. And I remember just thinking, like, this is like a really, really fun game. And again, not something that you expect to see on the Game Boy. So I came away like quite impressed, actually.
I can't tell you I even remember the first time I played the game because it was not a game I grew up with, you know. It was actually a game that was like a lot of Game Boy games to me growing up. I didn't have like an original Game Boy. My uncle had one. So when I would go to his house, I would play his original Game Boy. My first Game Boy was Game Boy Advance. I never owned Metroid II Return of Samus. And it was almost like a lot of like games that were just slightly older than me when I was growing up, where I didn't have the opportunity to just get any game that I wanted. A lot of games like Game Boy games were kind of like almost like mythical to me because like I only owned Game Boy Advance games. My uncle only had Super Mario Brothers, you know, like so I never got to play Metroid 2 growing up, but I knew about it. Very little of it though. And I think not until probably I got really I guess into Metroid following Super Smash Brothers and eventually getting into Fusion and Prime. So I didn't play Metroid 2 until like way, way, way later. I want to say maybe not until like college. And even then, I don't really remember playing it because I don't think I finished it the first time I played it. I'm pretty sure I picked it up. I started playing it. I was like, oh, this is really old Metroid. All right. And then I didn't I didn't keep playing it. I don't think until like I picked it up again much later. I want to say that I got it on the 3DS when it released in the virtual console, like way back when, like way, way, way back then. Like I want to say over a decade ago. Um, and yeah, I don't think I didn't have that like kind of connection to the game because I started with Prime and Fusion, and then only went back to Super Metroid and Metroid 2 in college because I kind of played everything that got released as it did from 2001 and onward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I actually I grew up with Nestroid, but I skipped Metroid 2 altogether. I didn't come back
Mm.
to it, and it was actually after college. That's actually it was one of the games I was going back and sort of revisiting retro stuff, and played Nestroid. I had like the Retron 5, whatever it was, right? I was going through just retro stuff, and then I actually played Metroid 2 on the 3DS eShop. It was just a black and white though. They didn't have the color options then, and it was my first time playing it. And yeah, Andy, I think you're right. It's kind of like Nestroid. It's a bit obtuse, but they did a much better job of like the visual cues, kind of helping guide you along. And I think its linear path. Its linear path was kind of nice too. But overall, it was yeah, I didn't visit till late, and so I didn't have that kind of nostalgia for it. But it's still I enjoyed the heck out of it though.
You know, it's funny that you say that, actually, because even though I played it like quite young, and it was, I guess, my third Metroid game, I wouldn't necessarily say that I had that nostalgia for it either. Like, I thought that it was really good, and I finished it and I beat it, and then I never went back to it ever. And I didn't go back to it until I got it for the 3DS, like you said, Dak. And then I'm quite sure that I certainly never finished the game on for 3DS. And it wasn't really until I played it a couple months ago over on Omega Metroid's Patreon that I was just like, okay, now I've finished Metroid 2 from start to finish, and it made me kind of reevaluate the game. So even though I played it, I didn't have that like nostalgia, and I would almost say that like I really love the story, and like the gameplay ideas behind the game, and I almost want to say like I liked remembering, or like maybe this doesn't make sense, but like I liked my memories of playing the game and what it brought to the franchise more than I actually enjoyed playing the game itself. So like I enjoyed my playthrough of it, but I didn't want to play that version again, even though I really liked what it brought to the table. You know what I mean?
Like
Yeah,
yeah, remembering the game was much better than loading it up and being like, "Oh, I just want like the experience to be loaded back into my brain, and I want to actually have to play and press the buttons." Yeah, I definitely feel that. That's how I felt, I think, kind of playing it because a lot of this stuff I already knew what happened in Metroid 2 before I played it because a lot
yeah.
of the information that's important is relevant in Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, whatever it is, and like you kind of learn the story like of like, you know, I'm sure I think part of it's mentioned in like the Smash Bros trophy, one of them. So like you kind of, at least for me, I knew the story going into it. So when I played it, I think for the first time, it was like not underwhelming, but it was, oh, I have to actually play the game now to get the info again and really earn it, almost like the knowledge. Yeah, for when I think of Metro 2, I think of like what happens in the game, like the plot, I guess, and not necessarily like, oh, I can't wait to actually play the game, which I don't think I really had that feeling.
I think Super, I mean, when you mention Super, they really, for them, Metroid 2 was really all about the baby, and the egg. I feel like it wasn't until maybe like more like in Fusion, even in Dread, they sort of really reminding everyone like it wasn't just about that. It was also about she eliminated all the Metroids. The Metroids are gone. I feel like that also became a bigger part of the story, sort of in hindsight. They've been bringing it back in, like hey, don't forget the Metroids are all dead because of Samus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I guess I wanted to just kind of throw that out there because it wasn't really until like we did this podcast that I was just like, okay, like it's time to revisit Metroid 2. I feel like I should play it. We're probably gonna be talking about it at some point. And so I played it like again, just like kind of very briefly a few years ago. And it really wasn't until like I did this playthrough like a couple months ago, like I mentioned on the Patreon page, that I was just like, wow, like this is actually like really like quite, I thought like quite fun. And I wonder too, like I kind of posed this question a while ago for one of our Metroid musings, and I wonder if like on one hand I kind of appreciate the fact that like this game is like one of the best Game Boy games. It's like a very daring Game Boy game in a lot of sense, but like I do wonder if this game wouldn't have maybe been better on like the Super Nintendo or NES, just because like what happens in this game is like so critically important to the series, and I almost feel like at the very beginning of the Game Boy's lifespan, it kind of was like almost viewed as like a gimmick system where like you might have like a fun little side story or a fun little whatever. And I think that this game and Link's Awakening did like a good job in kind of pushing that narrative away, but I do wonder if that always like held Metroid 2 back a little bit, and maybe it did, because like we're talking about how like we enjoyed the memory of it more than like actually playing it itself, you know?
Yeah, I think the system is really what ended up holding it, like what ended up holding it back, which I know, like Andy, you say that all the time about like Fusion's music, because it's held back by the Game Boy Advance, right? But like that was kind of turned up to an umpteenth degree with the original Game Boy and Metroid 2, because it was trying, the Game Boy was really, and with that game they were really trying to emulate like the NES Metroid experience. And I think for the most part they did in terms of gameplay, and they elevated it in a lot of ways. But like filtered through the Game Boy, like the black and white graphics and the sound that just was not like very pleasing to the ear. It's like piercing, almost, and almost uncomfortable. That stuff definitely held it back. And I don't know if like, because the weird thing about Metroid 2 is that the game actually adds a lot to the Metroid series that I think we take for granted. Like a lot of stuff, but a lot of that stuff I could argue could have probably been added in Super Metroid. It didn't need to be in this game. More in one way or another, it probably would have made its way to Metroid. I'm sure we'll go into all the different advancements this game added. On one hand, I'm like, oh, this game was really like, it pioneered a lot of Metroid stuff that we've come to learn today. On the other hand, Super Metroid could have done a lot of that stuff too. It just so happened that Metroid 2 did it first. But I like that they took Metroid and tried to use that as like this is what the Game Boy has to offer. It's not like just some side game. Like it's not like it's its own. This is the reason why you should own a Game Boy, because you can play a full like console experience almost on a handheld. Because I feel like that was the idea with Metroid 2, is to create the console Metroid experience in the handheld, not to give you like a much more watered. It ended up being in some ways a little bit more watered down, but like they're trying to recreate that instead of it being a gimmick. And it's interesting that they had that much faith in Metroid at the time to go with that. And I'm sure that was also like just inspiration, like seeing what they could do with Metroid at the time. But it's cool.
Like that is really, I was say just that is a good point though. Like the idea that they were willing to take Metroid even then like that far on the Game Boy. That's just, that's a good point.
And that's
Were you
kind of
gonna
what
say
I was gonna say. Like that's kind of why I respect Metroid 2 a little bit, and maybe like even Nintendo for this a little bit, because like I do feel like it was kind of daring. Like I actually
Yeah.
think there's almost no question that this would have been more successful on either the NES or the SNES, but
Yeah.
they did it, and they made this pivotal piece of like not only a Metroid story, but like you say, like lots of gameplay that we kind of take for granted was introduced in this game.
A lot of stuff actually. Going back to this game, I think people really kind of forget that like of course obviously the original Metroid game introduced a ton of stuff, but this game really like fine tunes the formula so that it can be kind of mastered in Super Metroid,
Yeah,
you know? So like a lot of like the stuff, like there was a lot of good polish that comes from Metroid 2, and then Super Metroid just has to do a little, like goes the next step in polish to
yeah.
really give you that full experience.
And I guess we could just talk about like let's start with gameplay since we're already kind of talking about it. Like I think that people really underestimate like save stations. That's a thing in
Yeah.
Metroid
Oh, yeah.
2, which never was a thing in Nestroid, and seems like such a like duh, but like that wasn't in the original, and Metroid 2 was doing that. Items like the space jump are here. Items like the plasma beam. Items like
Yeah.
The spider ball.
the spider
is
ball.
in
I was
this
gonna
game.
say like the
The jump,
spider
I was
ball.
say the spring ball.
The spring
Yeah.
ball is in this game.
That's
The space jump, the spring ball, the spider ball. These are all things that are in Metroid 2.
I still have to say, I think the spider ball is like just a terrible item.
Ah,
I do. The 2D spider ball. Let me be very specific. The 2D spider
Yeah.
ball is a terrible item.
Yeah.
Why?
In my
I
recent,
don't. I just.
go ahead.
I don't really like it. Like I feel like actually, which is funny because not so much when you're playing Metroid 2, but particularly in Samus Returns and AM2R, you go into morph ball mode. So you're pressing down, down, and then you press down again a third time to suction to the ground. And I feel like it would have been better if you could just hold a button or something. But I mean, that's neither here nor there.
So you just don't like how it was implemented rather than the actual feature itself.
I also I can't say that I'm crazy about like it's a little bit slow like going the perimeter of the walls, and I do appreciate how like all of these games give you the space jump like pretty quickly after getting the spider ball.
I feel like the space jump we were given two options of vertical exploration. You can do either the ball, or you can do space jump. Space jump, it's faster. You have more control. You can go left and right. You don't have to be attached to a wall. I feel like I'm not a big fan of what they did with the spider ball in Metroid 2. It's just too slow, and you're crawling. You know, it's a crawl space.
I think they kind of complement each other because it's like you have the space jump, which again is faster. You cover more space, but it's not as like you can't be as specific and mechanical with it. Like you can't get to every single corner of it. And then the spider ball comes in and fills in those gaps. So I think you kind of look at it as like the whole macro part of this, a whole package. Whereas, yeah, individually the spider ball is not very exciting, but it fills that little niche that it needs to fill because the space jump is not all encompassing.
I mean, like, either way, like it does introduce like a very cool item that has come back, and I mean, if nothing else, they introduced the item that Metro Prime brought it back and made it one of the best items in the series. So like I do really appreciate it for that. But yeah, like that really is like a lot of just hallmarks of the series that you find in this game. And like actually I think that one thing that you find a lot of too in here is like just Chozo imagery. Like I know it was kind of in the first game, but like I feel like it's really ramped up to the second. It kind of makes it a very more like part of the world, part of the story in this game too, which I also love about this game.
The statues, actually, I had a very specific note about the statues. They look fantastic in this.
They do.
I mean, they a lot. We were talking ahead before we started to kick it off. Everything's very zoomed in, and so you get a lot of detail in what you see. The Chozo statues, you get a lot of detail, and they look really good. And also, not to mention the one with its head knocked off with the ice beam. I love that.
Yeah, I like the sprite work in this game is awesome, actually. Like, Samus looks awesome. Her ship looks incredible. The Metroid Queen, I was like, I couldn't believe how good that sprite looked. Like, considering it's over 30 years old, like, and on the Game Boy, I was like, wow, like, this looks incredible. So I agree, actually. I think, like, basically all the sprite work in this game is, like, really, really spectacular. And, like, again, just kind of it would have been pretty easy, I think, to make like a Nestroid, like a smaller Nestroid for the Game Boy, and like just say that this is like your Game Boy Metroid. And they didn't. They did not phone it in. They made something new. They made something unique, and it's just like, wow, this is pretty awesome. So, even though there are things about Metroid 2 that I feel like obviously haven't aged very gracefully, I still do kind of have a respect for it, no matter what, just because of all it introduced and all that it kind of pioneered. Maybe one thing that we should focus on is the world itself too, because like I know that a lot of people in kind of the build up to and then after like Samus Returns came out, kind of we're talking about how like that game kind of maybe lost some of the atmosphere of Metroid 2. What are your guys' opinions of that?
Real quick, because I had a couple other things to say before.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I didn't realize we were gonna jump topics there. Because there's still a couple of things we haven't even.
I'm jumping the gun. Whoops.
I did want to say that I agree on the detail on the pixel graphics, because obviously Metroid is very clearly influenced by Alien and Aliens, but I think Metroid's influence to Alien kind of feels like a little more disconnected, because Metroid still kind of comes off like the original is kind of goofy, like in terms of the alien designs, I think, to me. Whereas in Metroid 2 and the added detail, like they really look more like aliens kind of design. And I think that comes through a lot more in Metroid 2 than it does in the original Metroid on NES.
Yeah. It's a good point. And the evolution too. Like you've got like, the face hugger to the actual xenomorph. You've got like what is the base one
Metroid
called? What's
Queen
the base one?
with like the
larva you talking about?
The larva to the alpha, gamma, all that stuff.
Yeah, and then it has like that black and white feel, so it's like an HR kind of like Geiger or Giger, like artwork. Yeah. So it's dope. A couple other things I wanted to mention real quick, just on the exploration. Metroid 2 also, I'm sure many people are aware of this, but it introduced crouching while firing, which is huge, but also allowing yourself to shoot downward while you're jumping in midair, which is massive for 2D Metroid, especially in Super Metroid, especially when you're trying to blast through stuff and fall down a huge, chute or whatever it is and get blocks out of the way. So those are really big. And I think, going back to my point about the spider ball and the space jump and how all that stuff worked together, I think it was really important that Metroid 2 added all these different layers to exploration and combat through the new upgrades, but also through being able to like crouch and fire, jump and fire and all that, because it had a similar rival on the Game Boy around the same time in a similar genre, the new Kid Icarus game that also came out, I believe, in the exact same month, in 1991 in North America, which was whatever the new Kid Icarus
Myths
game
and Monsters.
Myths and Monsters, yeah, Kid Icarus 2, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But the thing about that game was that game was the first of Kid Icarus to introduce 4-way level scrolling. You could go back and forth. So Kid Icarus was making this really big jump in terms of gameplay and like was making a really big leap. And I think Metroid needed to do the same thing. And while I don't think it did I don't think it had a massive change in gameplay like Kid Icarus got. I think it had all of these smaller changes that all added up to a really big change and really changed how Metroid, it still captured that original Metroid feel, but it really did feel like an elevated to an extent, relatively, not as elevated as like Metroid to Metroid Prime, but like Metroid 2 is pretty elevated, to kind of keep in line with a similar, IP in the same space, which I thought was interesting, that both these games came out around the exact same time and made these big advancements, and whether they were kind of competing with each other or not, they're both developed by Nintendo, still kind of keeping in line with one another and bringing these advancements to the new platform around the same time. So big things there.
That's very well spoken. That's a really great point. It makes me wonder, like, I wonder why Nintendo never made like Super Kid Icarus or something like that. They just kind of let it disappear for the longest time.
Maybe they were too close and too similar. Maybe after Metroid 2 and Kid Icarus, they were like, oh, Metroid made the bigger advancements. Maybe they're too close. Let's go with Super Metroid. I'm sure Metroid had that like kind of champion behind the scenes to be the poster boy. Like, let's get a Metroid game developed. So sometimes it comes down to having the right person in development that wants to make a game versus maybe not loving another IP as much, and that just comes down to it.
Yeah. There you go.
Or something else that I'm missing that I forgot. I don't know.
That's a great. I actually quite enjoyed of Myths and Monsters. Now that you mentioned that, it's a really fun Game Boy game. So yeah, I guess so.
Sorry, bet you back on track. You're talking about the world.
It's okay.
Of the game.
I jumped the gun. So
I had those notes down, and I was like, we're not getting anywhere.
Oh, I know what we're talking about. We're talking about the vibe of the game.
Vibe. Okay,
So I don't know. Like I think that like I get what people were saying with like there's like the SR 388 of Metro 2 is like very dark, very bleak, a lot of like black dead space in the background because there's nothing there. I actually like didn't mind necessarily. I should say I didn't mind necessarily. I like the fact that Samus Returns did add a little bit of life, a little bit of color to it. But I do recognize like what some people were trying to get at with that critique. And I don't know, like, do you guys have an opinion on that? Do you feel strongly one way or the other?
It feels like to me, honestly, when you're going down, it feels like you're going deeper and deeper and just deeper into the caverns of the world. There was like a moment where I noticed even where like you're given the ability that I think it's right after the high jump. You get the high jump and you can like you're starting to see these spikes now in the ceiling, and it's just giving you this impression of just like it's the world it's tight. It's a very small space, but it always feels like you're just deep in the world. It's a nice atmosphere. I enjoy it. I think it's very fitting for the game. It is a little sometimes some of the ruins are. I'm curious. I wish I could know more about the ruins. Obviously, they were limited with what they could tell. But overall, I think it's a good atmosphere. I think it's a nice atmosphere.
Yeah, very Undertale vibes with the black and white and minimalist looks there.
Yeah.
I've never played Undertale, but I've seen it. Anyway, yeah, I think they made the right choice in not putting in too much detail into like the background and like the overall how the world looks, and putting that detail more into like the creatures and Samus, and kind of leaving the background mostly and like the world itself kind of to the imagination almost in a lot of ways, and making it feel kind of just very dark and minimal. I think it kind of adds a lot of focus to the game. It's not trying to distract you, really. It's getting to the point, but it's also a 1991 Game Boy game. Like, it's not really like I can't go back and faulty be like it doesn't have all these textures. Blah, blah, blah. Like, it wasn't possible, or couldn't do it. It didn't really make much sense. I think they have the right focus because it's not drawing you. The world isn't drawing you away. The world's kind of created by the encounters and the creatures you run into. I think the best world vibing and maybe world building and maybe like vibe part of this is that this is the game with like the biggest show of like the full Metroid evolutionary line. And it adds that detail of, wow, this is like all these like the detail into like the biology of the planet. Like that comes through in terms of like what you see from the creatures and not necessarily seeing like flowers on the ground or whatever, more detailed backgrounds. I like that. And I think to this day, really Metroid 2 is like the game that has shown as much of the full Metroid evolutionary line more than any other game, aside from Samus Returns, obviously. And that part of world building is, I think, really critical to the game's success.
Yeah, I like that it gives it its own like I like that Samus Returns didn't replicate it, because I like that Metroid 2 still feels like really unique in that way, where it's like it does feel dark, it does feel foreboding, and it feels foreboding. Feels dangerous. It feels like something could jump out of the screen at you at any second, and often that is the case actually. And that kind of goes back into what we were talking about earlier, where like that goes into the gameplay a little bit, and turning your weakness, which is the platform that you're on and its limitations, into a strength, which is like the atmosphere and danger of your game. Because you could be walking and all of a sudden it's like, boom, there is an alpha Metroid, and it's like,
there's a Metroid right off screen.
Exactly.
They do a great job with that too, because like they we all know like they use like the husks, like this. You see like the husk, like, oh, there's a Metroid coming, and then like you get to like a room and it's like, oh wait, okay, I'm turning missiles on, scanning around, like it is it's that foreboding feeling of like there's a Metroid here, I gotta, and it's coming up, and it's such a good feeling. They do a great job capturing that.
So yeah, I think that like that tightness really actually like adds to the game a lot.
It's claustrophobic, which I don't think any Metroid game has really captured to the same extent, for better or for worse. But like, because I think a big part of Metroid is kind of feeling like, oh, you have this big kind of open world, not open world literally, but kind of literally, like I have this whole place to go explore and adventure in, like by myself. That's the Metroid experience. In this game, it's like you have these like cramped hallways, or like they feel cramped because you can only see an eighth of them at a time.
Yeah.
And Samus feels super huge because Samus is big compared. Like we were talking about this before the show, how Samus is so big compared to the rest of the environment because they kind of blow her up, so she's easier to see on the screen and you can see more detail. But as a result, it's so claustrophobic because Samus is so big relative to the world around her. I love that claustrophobia though, because it does feel like you kind of get that, like, I don't know if it's an old adage, but like you get kind of creativity through limitation and restriction, where you kind of have to figure out how to, like, experience it without having any option available to you. In this game, it kind of feels that way, where you have that. I mean, the Queen Metroid boss battle is again, we were talking about this before the show. Perfect example of this. It feels like such an intense boss fight because you have literally 5 feet to move. If you had a huge room, it would really honestly be probably a pretty easy boss fight. But because you have nowhere to go, it amps up the stakes, it amps up the excitement. And I think, Metroid 2 kind of inadvertently takes advantage of that, or like it just works really well, with a limitation. It does a good job with what it has.
Limitations can do an interesting thing. It's like Silent Hill, the fog in Silent Hill. It just they were forced into using something like that, and it created such an atmosphere. It's like Metroid 2, the limitation of the system. It's like it forced them into this sort of atmosphere, and it just worked out really well. It's interesting what the limitations can do.
Yeah, totally.
On another world building note, by the way, because I'd mentioned Metroids, I really like how this game. You're talking about the Chozo statues, which I think adds a little, flair to it. But this game really like shows how much the Metroids are a threat. I don't think the original Metroid gets that across as well. I think they kind of come across as like another enemy, like a higher level enemy, because they show up at the end of the game. Like just like from basic gaming fundamentals, you understand an enemy towards the end of the game is going to be stronger. It's going to be more important than the one you face in the first room. But I don't think they really got the game. Like, I don't think the game really gets it across. Like, if the game wasn't called Metroid, like they would just be like another enemy type to me. Like, really. And Mother Brain is kind of tied to the Metroids, but isn't a Metroid herself, whatever. Metroid 2, literally the whole premise is like Metroids are so dangerous. Like, if you weren't convinced that they were telling you they're so dangerous, you have to go and destroy literally all of them. Like, what could possibly sell how dire the situation is more than that? And then you actually get there and you have to take on all this crazy stuff, and you're like, oh, this is probably a good idea. Look how bad this can get. They were right to have me do this, and I'm going to carry out my mission. So I like that it adds like that needed, like it sold the Metroids, I think, better than the first game does in a lot of ways, especially when you end up getting to the Queen Metroid. Like, oh, this is how bad it can get. All right, we need to get rid of these. If we need to have more than one Queen Metroid running around, we're going to have a problem. So I like that added element is in here, that world building.
I have a question for the two of you then. It kind of, Dak, right along the side of that. So the idea of showing their threat level and how dangerous they are, it's been talked about a lot of time. It's been talked about a lot. The idea is that as you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the game, the enemies are far and fewer present. Do you think that was a narrative choice, or do you think that was more just a limitation? Do you think they were truly trying to capture that when they were doing Metroid 2? What do the two of you think?
Andy, what do you think?
I don't know that there's like a completely. Let me rephrase this. It's not like you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the game, and like there's no more enemies like that. That's not necessarily the case.
True.
Like there are like lots of other enemies. But that being said, I'm sure it has to be like a stylistic choice, because the game is crammed full of enemies at the beginning of the game. So like you can infer it's like, okay, well, like how much more processing does it take to load up an Alpha Metroid than like a Omega Metroid, right? But I do think it's like really, it kind of adds to that tension like we were talking about, where like you get to the end of the game and you're like, there's 4 Metroids left and they're probably all Omega Metroid. So it's like that anticipation kind of builds up, that calm before the storm feeling builds up. I would imagine that it's certainly a narrative choice. And again, it's not like there's nothing, but it is a little bit more focused, and they do, to Dak's point. And actually, Dak, it's funny that you said that, because you actually like took the words out of my mouth. I wanted to bring that up when we talk about the actual Metroids themselves, because while I feel like Metroid is a very hostile game, it doesn't convey the Metroids themselves as like these really important.
The planet's hostile, but the Metroids are just kind of another creature.
They're
on the
about
planet.
as hostile as anything else. Yeah.
Well, you get here now, you're like, oh, the Metroids are a really big deal. Like this is a problem. We gotta burn this place to the ground.
And like I feel like it's almost an unmatched feeling, like when you have like 4 Omega Metroids left or something like that, and it's just like, oh god, like I gotta take these down. This is like it's intense.
They set it up well because you get to that last area, and there are some enemies. There's not many, but there's 3 of them, right? There's those 3. It's right before it's the final before the queen, right? And there's these 3 Omegas, and it's so the music kicks up too. There's some I know we haven't gotten to music yet, but like it's very ominous music kicking off, and you got the 3 Omegas, and you're just gonna hunt them out, and it's like, oh boy.
My second part to that answer, and I don't mean to run away with the question, Dak, but like I think that like when you get to the point where there's 1 Metroid left, right? And we all know what that 1 Metroid left is, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, the counter starts going up and up and up, and like there's all these larva Metroids. That's an incredible moment. Like I actually think that's like just an absolutely incredible bit of storytelling through gameplay that this Game Boy game is doing in 1991. So So that leads me to even more so to believe, like, yeah, this is absolutely a narrative choice, because that was a really cool narrative moment in the game that's telling you a story about, like, you know, this 1 Metroid that's left. And maybe you don't know that it's a Queen Metroid at the time. I can't remember if maybe that was common knowledge or not. But if you don't know, then you're just like, something is making more Metroid. So that kind of tells you that there's, like, something really nefarious that you have to go and take down. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
I agree with all that, actually. I don't really have anything to add. That's kind of how I would put it. So yeah, didn't run away with it because I was gonna say all of that. Yeah, I agree. It's I kind of like that. I think it makes those last encounters so much more special, because if you had like more of an abundance of those end game kind of enemies around, it would kind of feel less special, I think, once you've kind of gotten through the 10th or the 20th of them.
Yeah.
I almost feel like if Metroid 2 is made today, you know, there's, let's say, however many Metroids there are in the original game. Today, the game would have like 1,000. There would be like 500 or 600 larvae you just like mow down in the first like 5 minutes of the game. You know, like, it would be like outrageous. And obviously it was a limitation of the time, but it kind of makes it kind of eerie that like you're going there and it's like you'd almost expect there would be more than this for an entire species of a creature. But of course, you can kind of hand wave that, like, it's a game from 1991, like whatever, like, you know. Yeah. But still, it kind of added this weird like mystery to it.
I like how big they were, but too, like in terms of just their the larva. By the way, I kind of miss that. You know, when you play like Prime, the Metroids are very small, whereas they're almost the size as you are in the actual Nestroid and in Metroid II and Super as well. I mean, well, obviously it's Super Metroid, but. I love the size. I love that they're big and they just have a big presence to them.
Yeah, even they were starting to get a little bit smaller in Super Metro. They could have beefed him up a little bit, maybe give him some girth. But I agree. And like, I think it's actually startling when you see like the larva sprite, like how big it is, because the alphas are actually like fairly small, which I guess makes sense because like you see the husk and then like the little guy just comes out of there. So it always takes me by surprise. But going back to your original point, it's like, I always think of that, you know, that really ginormous room right before you go up into the final area and fight the Queen Metroid. And there, it's a giant room that kind of bottlenecks at the bottom, and then like there's 3 areas. Like I just think like it's such a creepy, ominous room with nothing there, and it's kind of like, this is maybe just my own headcanon, but like, you know, when you find like you're playing a game and it's like, wow, I got ammo. Wow, I got a save station. Wow, I got this. It's like, oh no, that there's something bad around the corner. I feel like Metroid 2 has that kind of vibe going for it, and like consistently, almost in like the last third of the game, where it's like it feels like there is something big around the corner, and there is. Most of the time.
I mean, they have you going for quite a while, where you have the counters at 1. It's that whole water area where you have like those pools that you can kind of fall through.
Yeah,
it's right before the big room I think you're talking about, right? So you're going through. It's like, I mean, you've got 3 little areas, and it's the big room. It's just it's this whole period of just 1 on your counter. And there's like nothing around. It's just it's a really good the way they did that.
Yeah,
It is.
so the whole vibe I think is just like so good. In like I like listen, I really love what Samus Returns did with those Metroids. Like I think Samus Returns feels like very hostile as well, and like those Metroids feel like they feel dangerous but in a different way. Like they feel like just big, strong, nasty, where these ones feel creepy, like they could like kill you in the dark or something like that, right? Like
It's action packed. It is the aliens to Alien Samus Returns to
yeah, that's not a
Metroid
bad
2, right?
comparison.
It's the
Yeah.
action packed version.
Which is funny because I feel like Metroid 2 is kind of meant to be the aliens to
Yeah.
Metroid Alien, so
It's true, right? Actually,
and
that's a good, yeah.
And it is
so
in a
it
lot of
goes over.
ways.
And it is absolutely,
Mhm.
yeah. But that's a good point with Samus Returns. I feel like with Samus Returns, it's more like I don't know, like Metroid 2 feels like it has the claustrophobia. It almost feels more horror-ish because you're not able to fight as like easily as you can with like a modern game where I'm like, oh, I'm able to run around and counter and melee, but slide around, but in Metroid 2 I can't even shoot diagonally. I can barely move. I'm on the Game Boy. Like that's scary right there because I can't move at all.
Yeah.
So it adds to that. Again, it's these kind of like limitations that just add to the experience, which I think is ultimately what makes the game not obsolete. Because the fact of the matter is that it's unfortunate that, well, not unfortunate, but it's the fact of the matter that both Metroid 1 and 2 were remade, and not just remade, but especially in the case of Zero Mission, remade really well, and remade into two games that are really accessible to new Metroid players. So it's hard to recommend to new Metroid players, hey, go play the originals when the remakes exist. The originals, I think, are really more for not I want to say true Metroid, but like more dedicated Metroid fans, like have been playing the series, who really want to dig a little deeper. So that's why I don't think they're obsolete, because they have that value. But also a game like Metroid 2, the aesthetic and like the actual gameplay experience itself is so much different. And even in the case of Metroid NES and Zero Mission, but I think even more so for Metroid 2 to Samus Returns, just the look of the game is so vastly different. Like how you, your perspective as a player, so vastly different from Metroid 2 to Samus Returns. Samus Returns is so much more open. I wouldn't say claustrophobic at all. I think Samus Returns
I wouldn't say that either.
I don't think it has any of that claustrophobia, which Metroid 2 has in spades. So I think the gameplay, it's not like a one-to-one carryover. I think those original gameplay experiences still have merit, albeit they're a bit less accessible and a bit more clunky.
I wouldn't disagree with that. And Daniel, you can weigh in on this because I think you listened to me kind of talk about this on our Metroid 2 show on Patreon. But I was kind of saying like I don't think that Samus Returns replaces Metroid 2 at all. I could listen to an argument to be made that AM2R replaces Samus Returns, because when I was replaying Metroid 2, I was actually like really surprised. Like it sounds dumb because the game's literally called another Metroid 2 remake, but like I was surprised like how faithful of a remake that game was, considering like they put in like all these new gameplay mechanics, like the speed booster, power bar, like all this kind of stuff that they added to the game. I was kind of thinking it was more like almost like Zero Mission, where it was more of like an inspiration from that than like a physical like room by room remake, which in a lot of ways AM2R actually is. So I could listen to that argument. I mean, I think like all three complement each other like really, really well. And obviously like AM2R is like a very niche kind of interpretation of Metroid 2. But yeah, I guess that just it took me by surprise. And actually, I want to circle back to that later too, because it helped me navigate the game a little bit better. But I don't know. What would you think that's a fair, I don't know, opinion to have?
All three of them, I think you make a good point that they all complement each other well. Sometimes what I enjoy about Metroid 2 and even Nestroid sometimes is that they don't have the bulk that a lot of the other games have. They're very quick plays. You don't have to spend. AM2R is a great game. It's a great vision of what Metroid 2 maybe could have been, but it's also got a lot of extra stuff. It can be a long game. I enjoy the fact that Metroid 2 is shorter, and then Samus Returns is probably your typical length of a more modern Metroidvania game, but it also is a very different experience. Whereas AM2R I feel like it was capturing the experience of Metroid 2 while adding some extra bulk. And then, for better or worse, it's still a great game. I think they all three stand on their own. They all have different. If you want a quick play Metroid 2. If you want sort of a in-depth, maybe a sort of a weird blend of the old and new, play M2R. If you want like a truly modern experience of the story, play Samus Returns. They all have their own perspective.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair way to put it. I want to actually talk about like the actual Metroids themselves just really quickly before we move on to other stuff, and like talk about maybe the actual battling of the Metroids and then like just the design themselves, because like I feel like my opinion is like sifted and changed over the years, and I don't remember, but I always remember that I was never like absolutely like in love with some of the Metroid evolutions, because I was kind of like they don't look anything like Metroids. It looks like a bit too far, and I think I've just kind of left that in the past, and I'm just like especially like since I for this podcast I started playing AM2R, and then Samus Returns came out, and I've been playing that a lot, and like seeing those fights and stuff, and I was just like, yeah, these fights are actually like awesome, and I really love them. So in terms of like the actual Metroid designs themselves, like I think that, I mean, obviously like Samus Returns is kind of like the realization of this, but like I said, like I think that Metroid Queen is like such just awesome design. Like it looks so cool. Obviously Omega Metroid, like that's our namesake. Like they look incredible. I just think that like I've really kind of come full circle and like just started to love this Metroid evolution, which for a long time I don't know why I was kind of against, but yeah, I left that in the past. Fighting the Metroids themselves too, I kind of have like a love-hate with it, because like all of them just like they're very simple fights, and I feel like that kind of adds to the danger, which makes it a little bit more fun, and like kind of ups the risk reward of like trying to fight them. And like you fight the Omega Metroid and Samus Returns, and like there's large portions of it which feel more like a puzzle than a fight, where like you have to grapple the wall and bring down rocks and stuff like that, whereas these ones just like kind of give me that brawl feeling again.
I was gonna say they're all that, right?
Yeah.
They're all that Ridley, just you're duking it out, right?
Yeah, so I again was kind of digging that again, and I had forgotten like how kind of satisfying those fights were until I played it a couple months ago. And maybe the best part too is like every time you hit a Metroid, it has that classic Game Boy sound. I don't know how to describe it, but you know it if you hear it. Very like I remember from Wario Land, like that sound comes up whenever you hit an enemy, and it pops up when you hit a Metroid. I love it.
I'm not going to detract, but later on we do have to talk about the sound effects. But I don't want to. Dak, go ahead, man. If you want to jump into this, I don't want to detract our conversation here.
No. I agree. I like the fights. I wish I could shoot diagonally. I feel like a lot of the fights in this game become a practice in jumping in place and trying to get at the same eye level of a Metroid and hopefully land some shots in. That's my biggest memory of playing this game, are those repeated kind of gameplay loops. But yeah, I mean, I love the Metroid designs in this. Again, like I said, I love that they went into the evolutionary design. I think that's such a awesome, like it's really cool that Metroid obviously has a lot of sci-fi and like fantasy roots in it, but has that unique feel because the Metroids themselves are not just like a creature. Like so much about their whole evolutionary line and like what makes them so powerful, what makes them so dangerous, why they're so coveted. And this game again gives you like the exact, like we're not just told that, we're shown that all the entire forms of even from the beginning, the different stages of a Metroid life can be so exploited and they're so dangerous. And this game really does sell that. I think I personally love the Omega Metroid. I'm sorry, the Queen Metroid design, because I think for at least for me, the legged Metroid evolutions in this game are more like chicken or like hopping lizard to me than in maybe their later forms where they feel more dinosaur-like ish. Especially like the Omega Metroid and Metroid Fusion to me feels more like a crazy beast or like monster, as opposed to the Omega Metroid in this game, which feels more like some kind of like chicken thing or something.
That's so weird.
It's very legged, and it's like I love the Metroid Fusion's Omega Metroid's face, because it has these like this huge snarling like long mouth, like almost a snout-ish, like with how it's massive mouth. And in this game, it's like mouth is really short and like it's like a pug version of the Omega Metroid. It looks kind of weird. But then it circles back to cool with the Queen Metroid, which, all right, like, why does it have like a big head and like long neck? Like, oh,
who cares?
doesn't matter.
Oh, there
Who
goes the
cares?
mic.
Like, there goes the mic.
Yeah.
I'm waving my long arms around here in my room, but yeah, like I
We're
think
animated over here.
well, it's like it's one of those hand wave thing. It's like cool factor. Like it doesn't matter if it makes sense. Like it's cool.
Yeah.
I would I want to do like a more like I said on the show a couple weeks ago, do like a more biology based Metroid episode. But I now I'm thinking more about this. Like I wonder if there's anyone out there who like could like help us. Like if there's a scientist or biologist out there that like could tell us like if the Metroid was a real thing, would it evolve eventually? Would it become a Queen Metroid? Would that make sense logically?
There we go.
I don't know. That could be interesting, but I love
Yeah.
the design. I think it's very cool. It hits that like dinosaur, like huge beastliness of it. So I love that design. I think that's the strongest design from the whole game. Actually, is the Queen Metroid
I agree. It looks so
in terms of creatures.
awesome.
I go ahead. You, I, real quick though. I know you said go ahead, but just real quick. You had also said earlier the ship design, because I'm talking about my favorite designs in the game, but like the Queen Metroid and then the Samus's ship. Samus's ship does look really sick.
It looks so good. If you haven't played this on NSO yet, by the way, fire up like the Game Boy Color modifier. The ship looks awesome in that game. It looks really, really cool. But so I was saying that like all these fights against the Metroids are like, kind of shoot 'em ups. But I would also say that like the fight against the Queen Metroid is like that is a brawl, but in a different type of way. Like it's a intense fight. Like and again, I don't know why. I just when I was playing this, I was like not I guess in my head I was like rolling into the Queen's mouth and laying like a power bomb, or in this case, just a regular bomb. That's kind of like a thing that was invented a little bit down the road, like maybe for some other Metroid games. But like, no, you're rolling into the Queen's mouth, you're doing damage, you're bombing, and it's like it's such a crazy intense fight that I actually think is like one of the better. I don't know if I would have said this before, but like I think it's one of the better like upper echelon final fights of the series. It's just like it's so intense. I love it. And then of course, we're talking about Metroids in here, and we haven't talked about the most important one yet, which, unless anyone has anything to add, I want to do a nice little segue into the story here really quick.
Oh wow, I was gonna say, no, go ahead. It'll come back to me.
Are you sure?
Yes, I had a train of thought and
Okay.
I lost it. Go ahead.
I love that baby Metroid. It's and so I was playing Metroid 2, and again, like we were talking about earlier, how it's like so impressive, and I just like respect this game for not phoning it in, and it could have been a very different game, but it wasn't. And like the story that this game tells with that final Metroid hatching and your decision not to exterminate it, and then like how that like that impacts the rest of the series still to like today, like from Super to Fusion to Dread, like those to Samus Returns, like all of those games have like a massive like focus in one way or the other on the baby Metroid. So it's almost just like I know that Metroid 1 was obviously like the start of the series, introduced Samus, introduced Space Pirates, but like really like not like a lot happens in that game. It's not really until Metroid 2 that the story like really starts to take shape and like kind of unfold and realize its potential. And maybe that sounds blasphemous, but when I was playing it, I was just like, man, I think people really underestimate the importance of this game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think it's. I mean, I think it's objectively true that this game has an incredible amount of significance in the overall story. It's actually, I think, fascinating how a game that was not like it didn't get re-released until 20 years after its release. Because if it came out on the Nintendo 3DS in 2011 and then 1991 it came out, that's 20 years later. For 20 years, a lot of people could just like not play. Like, they didn't have a Game Boy. They just couldn't play one of the most important games in the whole series and not get those plot beats and not. I mean, again, that's why like a lot of that information ends up getting filtered through other games and other media. That's how you kind of learned about it. But I always thought that was fascinating. But yeah, it's a massive. it does a lot with the story because, like you said, it absolutely could have phoned it in. It could have done another Metroid 1. It could have had. It doesn't even have an escape sequence. It subverts your expectations. Like no escape a sequence. You get the Metroid and you head out with it, right? It also interestingly introduces the trope of the Galactic Federation going in somewhere, getting absolutely bodied, and then calling up Samus to come clean up the mess. That's the first time that happens. That happens a bunch of times in the series, and then the first time it happens is in this game. But yeah, it's a very important, like, to not underestimate the significance that this game has in the entire game story. And I also think it's fascinating how that one decision Samus made literally affects like pretty much every single game if that comes after. I think every single game that comes after it, literally, Super, Fusion, Dread, all impacted by it. And then yeah, it's really cool that has such a significant it's such a significant part of the game. But yeah, they could have been, I guess they could have just done an original Metroid, and they didn't do that. So I respect
like
that.
They could have made Super Mario Land. I love that game. It was one of my favorite. Yeah. One of my first games ever.
They could have just made Super Mario Land or whatever. Yeah.
And instead, which is actually funny because Kid Icarus did the same thing, as you mentioned earlier, where it's like that game also kind of was just like, okay, we're not just making a gimmick game here. Like we're gonna do something big, something special. So I really do think that, like, again, Metroid 2 like really deserves a lot of respect for that. Like it had some stones on it to do the stuff that it did. And I think that moment with the baby Metroid at the end is like, we were kind of arguing against this moment last week, Daniel, but I think for a lot of people, that was like a nice, like, somber moment in that game that really maybe you don't get a lot of those kind of moments in not even necessarily in Game Boy games at that time, but like a lot of those moments in video games, because they're kind of still in their, they're in their infancy still at that point. So yeah, just some stones.
It felt cinematic. It felt like a dramatic moment in a game. It's like this moment of drama, and actually, and you even said how it's like, oh, you decide not to kill the Metroid. That's the thing, a big part of it. You don't decide that. Samus decides that, and it establishes this character agency that not a lot of games at the time had, and I don't think really even other Nintendo games ever end up getting. In other Nintendo games, sure, you're playing as the character, but you make essentially almost all the decisions. You play as Mario, and Mario's not making these crazy decisions on his own. You're making them, or you're getting to the objective and the things play out. Here, you have no decision in this. Samus does it, and it has such a huge impact, and it establishes that Samus is not just the player avatar, but is an independent and specific character that you are playing as. Right. And not you're not just playing as a generic, avatar into the game, which I think is really significant.
Yeah, totally. All right.
No, sorry. I was gonna say, I don't have much to add. Honestly, I can only agree with like everything you guys have said. It really subverts your expectations there at the end. It's just from what it sets up.
So I want to talk about navigation a little bit, because I think fairly, by the way, I think that like the biggest critiques against Nestroid and Metroid 2 are that they're very confusing to play. They're very confusing to follow. But I actually don't think that it's quite fair to lump those two games together. While I would say that both of them can definitely be confusing to navigate, I think if you're playing this game without a map, Nestroid is far worse to play than Metroid 2 in terms of like you're going to get lost, you're going to get turned around, everything kind of sort of looks the same. I think navigation in this game is like far better. And I don't know if that's kind of because what I was alluding to earlier. Like I've played a lot of AM2R, and it is a very like beat by beat remake in a lot of ways. But like I also feel like, kind of like you brought up earlier, Dan, it's like it is a very narrow and straightforward path with like, yes, some deviations and some room to explore there, but like generally speaking, I feel like in this game, you can kind of center yourself a lot. And like, if you get lost, there's like points where you can go back to and you kind of get your bearings again. Like if you're in the Golden Temple, for example, you can go around in that. And if you kind of get turned around, you can come back out and eventually you'll land at the base of the Golden Temple. And from there you can start again. And like, I feel like there's a lot of different areas in the game like that. Like the tower is in this game as well. That kind of serves as like a nice grounding point. I feel like this game kind of gets flack that's no, I don't want to say it's undeserved, but I don't think that it should be lumped in with like Nestroid in terms of like this game is awful to play in 2023 if you don't have any kind of map. And I'm curious if you guys feel the same.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think Metroid 2 does not deserve to be clumped together, because if you think of Nestroid, the big area, right? It's that spot. It's that little weird thing you got to bomb in order to get to Ridley's lair. It's just so obtuse. Why would you ever bomb it?
Mm-hmm.
But then you have Metroid 2, and they do a very good job with visual cues and audio cues. You've got the surface theme. When you're in the main sort of pipeline, right? You've got the surface theme going on, and you enter into it's area 1, area 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? All the way down. When you enter in an area, the music cuts off. It goes dun dun dun. And it gets quiet. It gives you some beeps and boops, and you're in the hunting zone, so to speak, right? And then even there, like, do you guys? I don't know if it's how, but if you remember, it's when you're looking for something like the high jump. There's like this high jump area. When you look at it, you might think it's like, oh wow, why would anyone ever even think to go that way in Metroid 2? But they give you kind of like this idea, like it looks like there's actually a pathway there, and they sort of filter you that way. They do a great job just kind of giving you the cues you need to navigate the world. And it's so much, it's miles from where they were with Nestroid. It's completely different. What about you, Zach? What about Dak?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they're still pretty they're still pretty close to each other. But yeah, I think you could, I think there's an argument to say, I don't know if you necessarily lump them together, but I feel like it's close.
No.
I feel like it's close enough where like it's at this point, like it's whatever. I think you lump it together. Yeah, they're still kind of a bit of a, they're not as accessible as they could be, which is understandable. They, in that regard didn't age as well as, I mean, they're crazy old games. I mean, and that's not a huge lump against them. But yeah, I think I think relative to like the advancements that Metroid has made today, I would still lump them together. I don't think.
I guess I can't argue against that.
It's not a huge indictment against Metroid 2. It's just a symptom of its time, really.
Yeah, that's kind of like what people lump like the 3 like Zelda CDI games together. 2 of them are really bad, but like one of them is like significantly worse, like significantly. And I always try and push back against that. One thing that Metroid 2 does, the map does, by the way, that's really kind of awesome, is there's a lot of like shortcuts that show up on the map, and like I guess warp points might actually be the more appropriate term, because it's like you can go, and like there are one-way points where you go in and then you're jettisoned back to an area kind of prior to when you maybe went into the weeds a little bit and did some exploring. One other thing that I would also say about Metroid 2 and its map is that I feel like this game is like very good at funneling expansions for you along the way to like make sure that you never feel like completely underpowered. Like there's lots of rooms where there's like some fairly obvious like missile expansions to find, but like even the ones that are a little bit more out of the way, I feel like they're not so obtuse and out of the way that they are you never feel, or at least I never feel like I'm underpowered. I never feel like I don't have enough energy tanks. I always feel like if I die, it's either because it's like a really awesome fight, or like I just didn't do the right thing, and it's not because like I don't have what I need in order to defeat whoever I'm trying to defeat, if that makes sense. So I also think Metro 2 does a really good job with that.
A lot of the pickups I feel like are very much in your face. They don't have that modern feeling like a puzzle. Like what do I need to solve to get this pickup? They're very much like you go to some rooms and you've got 3-4 missile tanks just sitting there, really just ripe for the taking.
Yeah, but I would say that it does carry over some of Nestroid's gimmick, where it's like you just bomb random walls, and like maybe
it's true.
It's because like we are like I think like we speak the Metroid language and kind of maybe know what to look for in terms of like, oh, I bet you under this Chozo statue there's something, right? Like, and even saying that, I think the game shows you one missile beneath the first one, and then like you're just kind of predisposed to do that for everyone. But even so, like I think there's a lot of expansions that, if you speak that Metroid language, like you can find them clearly, even though they're like sort of kind of hidden. So I think that Metroid 2 does a good job of that as well.
I have a question. So in terms of like the hidden kind of shortcuts you mentioned, really right up at the start. I mean, you're right, literally just left your ship. You're going down. You know that little spot where you can get into a ball and you can cut across the top of a couple corridors. You know what I'm talking about? You literally can just roll through the wall. You bypass like a little bit of a. Normally you'd have to go down, around, and then back up. Whereas at the start you can just roll through.
Is it after? Is it after the temple or before?
No, it's literally like the first, second room you walk into.
Oh, well, then no.
All right, well, never mind. I was curious what you guys thought because it's in my mind was like, was speedrunning a thing back then? Like, why is it there? What was the purpose? I'm so curious.
I bet you it was a thing.
That's a good question. I actually don't. I have no idea. I mean, like, was the internet developed enough for there to be like online communities for speedrunning? I don't think so. And like,
I don't think so, but I wonder if that was like a thing at conventions.
Yeah, I'm sure it was like a thing. Like, let me try to complete. Like, it wasn't probably like a more like established thing, but I'm sure people were like, let me try to beat this game as fast as I can. But I am curious. Like, if anyone was around then who maybe would know more than we would, like, what was it like? Was there people? Were there people that were like formally trying to speedrun games back then? I don't know.
You know what? I think I'm going to make a declaration and say I am willing to bet. I don't know. I'll be able to bet you guys coffee that there were in fact people that were speedrunning because Nestroid, like the whole design of the ending is like, this is your time, do it faster and you get a better ending.
That's true.
So I think even with that people are probably predisposed to try and beat the game a little bit, quicker and maybe because I do think that there's different endings based on time in this one, right?
I mean, you do get that. I'm sorry, I had just done a recent playthrough, and I did get a time at the end, and I have to say, I don't know I had 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I had like it was Samus in legit a bikini, so I don't know if there's multiple endings or not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think about because Metroid 2 came out not really long after like the arcade game boom, where I'm thinking back like. A big reason why people got really good at those games is because you only had a quarter for a play session. So it behooved you to get really good because the better you were, the longer you got to play off that quarter. So thinking about that, it would actually be against your money, your financially to speedrun games, because in theory, to speedrun something would be to end your game session quicker and therefore needing to spend more money. But then by the time you get a Game Boy, you don't need to spend money on individual sessions anymore. You just have the game. So I wonder if like had that kind of caught up, like had people mindset wise kind of like, oh, now I have possession of the game, I can beat it however I want, I don't have to, but and also by that time games had evolved past like high scores and all of that. So like there was, you're not looking for a high score in Metroid.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. There's no score. Yeah,
all that kind of stuff is just interesting to think about. Like I wasn't even alive back then, and years after that I was still very young, so I didn't know. I know like even growing up, like I never really, I was not a completionist, but when I played games, I played to complete them and not necessarily speed run them. Though I know back even in the later 90s, obviously there was speed running, but I'm curious around like the time Metroid 2, like was that something that was, maybe more common than we would think or not? I don't know.
I bet you it was. I really do. I bet it was. That's a great observation, though. I didn't even know that room existed, and I just booted up Metroid 2 last night.
Next time you play, remember it's there. They give you a visual cue. They do. They hint it.
I want to talk about one last thing before we wrap up on Metro 2, and that is the music, which
save the best for last.
Yeah,
with this one here, guy.
I feel like a lot of me. Maybe because I hadn't played it in so long, and like I was kind of like, I have Samus Returns and AM2R. I don't need to play this anymore. But I feel like I underestimated the music of this game, and maybe this game as a whole. But like listen, like a lot of the tracks in this game that are like the iconic tracks, I think have been remade and sound better in AM2R or in a Samus Returns or whatever various covers. But like listening to the game, like. I love the Surface theme. I still say it's like a top 10 iconic theme of this series, which is unfortunate that it's never come back. But
I think it's a great theme, but iconic is not the right word. Doesn't mean it's a bad track. It's not iconic.
Well,
sorry.
I mean,
sorry.
So
it's a good theme, but all right. Anyways,
one thing I would say is that I think like one track that caught me by surprise is the final area in right before the Metroid Queen, which I always refer to as the genetics lab because that's what the track is called in AM2R. And I kind of just thought that it was like a remake of like kind of like how Golden Temple in AM2R is a remake of the Temple theme, which sounds like very different. I kind of thought that was the same too, but I'm listening to this track and I was like, oh my god, this is like so intense and creepy, like the like it sounds so alien and weird. And then the theme against I almost said Metroid Prime, the Queen Metroid is like so it actually has kind of that same, to me, like Metroid Prime kind of big fight kind of vibe, which I really love. And then like just like the music, I just think like the music in general of this game is almost exclusively exceptional, except for probably the theme that plays when you fight the Metroids, which wears out its welcome a little bit.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm curious, the Queen theme you're talking about when you're fighting the Queen, is that the one where it's like it's like I swear you can feel that one in your wait, no, the actual fight, I'm sorry, the one where I'm thinking of the one where it's just before, it's after like the lab, so it's not like the Torian music, but it's just before you're actually at the fight, and it's like an alarm going off. It's like
it's like the ambient version of the Queen fight. It's awesome.
You can feel it in your bones. It's such a good theme. It makes it feels. It's crazy. Yeah, so good.
So yeah, music. But it's funny that like I feel like this game has like such great music, and granted, it doesn't have a lot of music tracks, but like none of them have come back, and like maybe I guess part of that makes sense because like the Surface theme is very tied to SR388, the Queen Metroid theme is very tied to that fight, so like it's not like you fight a lot of Queen Metroids except for Other M. It's not like you go back to SR388 since, but like I don't know.
Technically, you do in a cutscene.
Well, yeah, okay.
Fusion, right. You are there at the beginning of the game.
Can you imagine if they remade Fusion and added a part where you're on SR388?
I think they should.
That remix is playing.
That should be like that section should be like a short little mission at the beginning. I think would be really cool. I'd be down for that.
That'd be so awesome.
Yeah.
But I would just love to see those themes come back. I hope that they make them happen.
I agree.
Particularly the Genetics Lab theme, because that theme rocks.
It's good music, but I just want to say I thought they did a great job really utilizing it. Like, it wasn't just music in this game. They really utilized it because, like, I think I had mentioned it earlier, you know, when you're in like that main area where it's just you're in between areas, it's got the Surface theme is playing, but whenever you go into a new area, it shuts off and it goes a dun dun dun, and it's playing the area theme. And then like, or when you're when you're done, right? You've cleared out the Metroids and you leave the area, and Surface theme kicks back up, and you're going back in, you're progressing. They use it to a really good advantage to kind of help drive you forward. It's so like it sounds great, but it's used really well. It was nice in that.
And I didn't even mention actually the Baby Metroid theme, which is one of my favorite themes.
Yeah.
I can't believe that theme hasn't come back again either. I actually don't know what's going on. Why hasn't this music come back?
Yeah,
that's such it's the victory lap at that point. You've killed the Queen. It's just you and the Baby Metroid rising back up to the surface. The music's playing, and it's just that's that. It's all right. I don't know about somber, but it's the victory lap. You've got you've completed your mission. Well, sort of.
I don't know that I would say it's like somber. To me, it felt more like almost celebratory, but not because you defeated the Queen, but because you are like, this sounds bad, but like you are allowing this new life into this world or something, like, so it's like this is a nice moment that I'm not gonna blast you into a million pieces. Like,
it's a nice moment. I think that's perfect. It's a nice moment. That's what it captures.
It's
hopeful.
Like things
there.
Different.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm pretty much out of things to say about Metroid 2. I was really impressed with it, playing it again. I wouldn't necessarily sit here and say, like, if you are, you know, a newer Metroid fan, this is the best version of this game for you to play. But I think that this version really does have a lot to offer. Like, I really think that. And I think it's definitely worth playing. If you've never played it, this is probably the best time to do so, because you're going to be able to play it on Nintendo Switch Online. You're going to have save states, you're going to have rewind, you're going to have all these features that are going to make it really nice, and you're going to have a map on OmegaMetroid.com, by the way. So like I feel like if you've never played it and you really like Samus Returns, like try this, because it's a different side of the coin, but a really worthwhile experience that I think kind of gets like underappreciated a little bit. So yeah,
I agree with that. I think it's
And use a map.
underappreciated game. Yeah, use a map.
Yeah, use a map. Like you don't have to like look at like too much at. Just give yourself a general direction, because like you don't want to be crawling up every inch of a wall. Honestly, I've done it in one of my million playthroughs. You don't want to do that. Just take a map and have a good time with it. It's a fantastic game.
Yeah. I would say if you are a veteran Metroid fan or a dedicated Metroid fan and you haven't played it yet, yes, I would go and play it. If you're a new Metroid fan and you just started playing with Dread or Metroid Prime Remastered, I would recommend that you go and check out more recent Metroid games. I would go and play Remastered and or Dread if you haven't played one or the other. I would check out Fusion. I would check out Zero Mission. I would check out 2 and 3. Like I would check out the other Metroid, Zero. I would check out all those other games before getting to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to be put off, I think, by some things, and I think you'll also appreciate it more when you play. When you'll see the things you take for granted, but also what Metroid 2 has to offer. But yeah, I think if you're a newer fan, maybe check out some other things. By the way, but still a great game, and you should get to it eventually. By the way, there's one thing that we didn't mention that this game elevated in terms of the Metroid experience, an advancement that it brought to the series, and that was the introduction of new suits and them looking different.
Oh, yes.
Because with the original Metroid, the way that we knew that Samus had a new suit was because it was a new color. But there was no color in Metroid 2. Therefore, they had to change how Samus's suit actually looked and design them differently, so the form and silhouette was different and noticeably different from suit to suit, which is why we now have a power suit and a various suit and all these different things that look different, that have bigger shoulder pads or not, whatever it is, because of Metroid 2. So again, creativity, under limitation breeds some advancement, breeds evolution, and that's exactly what we got. And could you argue that, maybe they would have done that in Super Metroid anyway? Probably, but this game did it.
But you also had the pose too. You had the, like when you picked up the various suit, like it did like your prime pose, right? She just stands there straight and it looks it's so badass. It's so badass.
Awesome.
I think that's a big thing because I mean we have Metroid 2 to thank for our big shoulder pads, which still look great.
Yeah. No respect for the Justin Bailey suit. That was a costume change if I ever seen one. I love that came back in Samus Returns, by the way. I think that was great. But no, we really do owe Metroid 2 like a lot. A lot in terms of story, in terms of gameplay, in terms of legacy. It's worth your while to play, and it's not going to be, if you're a newer Metroid fan listening to this and you're thinking like, oh god, like it's not going to be one of those games that like you need to slog your way through just to say that you did it and to pay homage to a classic. I really think you can have like a lot of fun playing this game, especially with all those, those perks that we talked about that are part of NSO. So you should check it out if you have never played it or if it's been a long time. I think I think that we've kind of extolled the virtues of this game, and there's a lot to love. So there we go, Metroid 2, Samus Return of Samus rather. All right. So anything else that we want to add about this game before we get on out of here?
God, nothing. I mean, you took the words out of my mouth right there too. It's give it a shot. It's not that long. It's worth the play.
There we go. Okay, well, we are going to get out of here, and I want to let everybody know we have a very special episode next week, and it is going to be live streamed. That's right, live streamed on our YouTube channel. So on the 26th, 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we're going to be live streaming it. We're going to have some guests. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to debut some new stuff. It's going to be a big show. So tune into our YouTube channel and check it out. Until then, we are going to get out of here, but we want you to check us out over on Twitter at Omega Metroid Pod, at Spateri316, at DaxCity_, at A Fallen Apple, and at OmegaMetroid.com, where you can get all of your Metroid 2 guides and maps and everything that you need there. So check it out. And check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Like, subscribe, leave us a sweet 5-star review. We would love to see that. I haven't. I don't read the reviews very often, but I always look at them. They're always appreciated. So thank you to everybody that takes the time, and we appreciate everybody that does. Until next week, we are going to get out of here. Tune in on the 26th. We're going to have a big show. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to be talking some Metroid then. So until then, everybody, take care.